Millionaire abandons black wife for being infertile and years later finds her with a child. Alex Carter froze on the cobblestone path of Central Park. Jasmine, the woman he had once walked away from, sat on a bench, her smile soft yet resolute. Beside her, a little girl, no more than 3 years old, rested her head on her mother's shoulder. Her light curls framed eyes as bright as crystal. The child's clear, melodic voice pierced the stillness. "Mommy, who is that man?" Jasmine's hand trembled ever so slightly, but her gaze did not falter. She looked up at Alex, her lips parting as she softly replied, "He's an old friend, Ellie." Alex's heart clenched painfully. How could this be? He had left Jasmine, convinced they had no future because she couldn't have children. And yet, here she was, with a child. A vivid, undeniable testament to something he had never imagined possible. This was only the beginning. What had truly transpired during their years apart? Who was Ellie, and what was her connection to Jasmine? Stay tuned, because the revelations to come will defy all expectations. Prepare yourself to uncover the stunning secrets ahead. The story begins on the 50th floor of a skyscraper. Alex Carter's office was dressed in modern luxury, offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. To Alex, this wasn't just an office, it was the symbol of his extraordinary success. At 40, he had built an impressive real estate empire that struck fear into his competitors whenever they heard his name. That morning, as the October sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass panels, Alex stood in front of the window, seemingly calm. But inside him, a silent storm was brewing. He had just received a message from his secretary, "Jasmine is online." Alex took a deep breath, adjusted his Italian tie, and walked over to his desk. Pressing a button on the intercom system, he replied curtly, "I'm busy." Jasmine's voice echoed from the other end, shaky yet firm, "Alex, we need to talk about the test results." A moment of tense silence enveloped the room. Alex closed his eyes, feeling the weight on his heart. But he kept his voice cold. "I already know." Jasmine interrupted, her voice icy, filled with the pain she tried hard to conceal. "Then there's nothing left to discuss." The other end went quiet, but Alex could clearly picture Jasmine sitting in her small office at the hospital where she worked as a pediatrician. Maybe she was trying to hold back her tears, though he knew for certain they would fall. His heart clenched for a beat, but he wouldn't allow himself to show weakness. Not now. Not in front of Jasmine. "How can you say that we're still a couple?" Jasmine burst out, her voice breaking, but it did not lose its strength. Alex looked down at his desk, where his engraved pen lay still. He knew no single word could fix everything. He spoke in a low tone, still keeping his emotions hidden. "There's nothing more for us to discuss, Jasmine. I think you understand that." "Understand?" Jasmine let out a bitter laugh, her voice filled with a deep, stinging resentment. No one knew better than her. Alex was not easily swayed. But today, Jasmine could no longer stay silent. "Alex, you left me. Not because our love wasn't enough, but because I couldn't give you a child. Can't you see that?" Her words were like a dagger plunging into Alex's chest, but he didn't flinch. He remained as indifferent as always, knowing that any sign of weakness would only make everything worse. "I didn't abandon you, Jasmine," he said, his voice hard. "I just did what needed to be done." But deep inside, Alex knew that his words could never ease the pain Jasmine was carrying. Over the years, he had convinced himself that leaving Jasmine was for the benefit of them both. But now, hearing her agonized voice, he wasn't sure anymore. Jasmine took a deep breath, her voice now full of determination. "Well, good luck to you, Alex. You're going to need it more than anyone else." She hung up, leaving Alex standing in the vast room where silence turned into an unbearable burden. He looked out the window, his gaze sweeping across the towering skyscrapers, but his mind drifted far away, to a time when he still believed love was enough to overcome any hardship. The dim light of late afternoon seeped through the crystal-clear glass panels, casting reflections across Alex Carter's luxurious office. He leaned back into his black leather chair, turning away from the panoramic view of Manhattan. Every sharp line on his face betrayed the storm raging within him. Jasmine had forced him to face the truth he had always tried to avoid. Through the phone, her voice resonated, no longer shaky, but strong, as if she had found herself amidst the heartbreak. "We have to face this, Alex. Together." Alex gripped the armrest of his chair tightly, his darkened eyes skimming over the finely crafted objects on his desk. He turned back, speaking in a chilling tone. "A couple who can't have children has no future." Jasmine couldn't hold back a sigh of disappointment. "Last night, you made it clear that there were other options. We could embrace them together, Alex. Why do you refuse?" He stood up abruptly, took a few steps towards the window, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the fading evening light. His voice, when it came, was as sharp as a knife. "I need someone who shares my blood, Jasmine. Someone who will carry on the legacy I've spent my whole life building." Those words made the space between them freeze. Jasmine could feel the pain tightening around her heart, but she refused to show weakness. In that moment of tension, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Graham Wilson, Alex's longtime attorney, entered with his familiar black briefcase. Alex gestured for Graham to wait, then continued the conversation, his voice now sounding like that of a stranger. "That's my answer, Jasmine. I think you understand." Jasmine let out a bitter laugh, the sound cutting like a blade. "Understand? That 5 years of marriage can be tossed aside just because I can't have children? Is this really what you want, Alex?" He turned to look at her, his eyes devoid of any emotion. "The divorce papers will arrive later. Today," he said, his voice steady, striving to keep control. "My lawyer has been quite generous with the terms. You will have nothing to complain about." Jasmine's lips curled in a bitter smile, tears threatening to spill, but she held them back. "You really think this is about the money, Alex?" Not wanting to drag things on, Alex glanced at the gleaming gold Rolex on his wrist, then replied coldly, "I have an important meeting right now. Graham will take care of everything." Without waiting for a response, Alex hung up, leaving an unsettling silence to fill the room. He turned his back to his desk, but Jasmine's final words echoed in his mind. Across the city, Jasmine put down her phone, her hands trembling. For a brief moment, she felt like she had lost everything. But then her eyes sharpened. She whispered to herself, like a vow, "If this is what you choose, Alex, I will prove to you that losing me is the biggest mistake of your life." The quiet winter afternoon descended, and the pale light filled Alex Carter's office. Graham Wilson stepped forward, placing the thick stack of documents before Alex. The atmosphere in the room was tense, heavy, but Alex maintained his composure, as if everything was under his control. Graham spoke, his voice polite but pointed. "Everything has been prepared as you requested. It's a fair agreement, and I doubt she will contest it." Alex nodded, saying nothing. He picked up the gold-plated pen on his desk, his firm hand trembling slightly as he signed each page. Every stroke of his signature felt like severing the last ties that connected him to Jasmine. "I want everything handled quickly and discreetly. I don't want this to affect business," Alex stated, his voice devoid of emotion, as if he was executing just another business transaction instead of ending a 5-year marriage. Graham nodded in agreement, gathered the documents, and left the office. As the door closed, the room plunged into silence. Alex stood up, walked to the large window, his eyes drifting over the city lights. But no matter how dazzling the view, his heart was filled with an uncomfortable emptiness. Weeks passed. Alex threw himself into work like a man possessed, trying to fill the void within with numbers, contracts, and meetings. He expanded investments, closed multi-million-dollar deals, and maintained the perfect image of an unshakable businessman. If anything had changed, it was the dark circles under his eyes or the sudden outbursts of anger that his employees dared not comment on. In his vast penthouse, Alex had removed all the wedding photos with Jasmine. The empty frames left faint marks on the walls, but to him, it was the only way to erase her presence from his life. Every evening, under the soft yellow glow of his living room, Alex would sit in a luxurious leather chair, sipping his favorite whiskey. He convinced himself that this was the right decision. Jasmine no longer fit into his plan. A strong empire demanded sacrifices, and she simply wasn't part of that future vision. One cold evening, Alex received an email confirming that the divorce had been finalized. Jasmine hadn't contested any of the terms. There were no disputes, no arguments that he had been ready to face. He gripped his whiskey glass so tightly his knuckles turned white. Part of him had hoped Jasmine would fight, would show the fierce determination like she did when they first fell in love, the resilience, the stubbornness he had once adored. But her silence, her acceptance, left him feeling emptier than any resistance ever could. "So, it's done," Alex murmured, his voice echoing through the empty room. But even though everything was over on paper, the feeling of unease still lingered within Alex, clinging to him like a ghost he couldn't escape. The early morning spring light filtered through the branches in Central Park, blending with the chirping of birds. Alex Carter, once a symbol of pride and power in the business world, walked along the gravel path, his posture dignified but his eyes carrying the traces of time. Recently, his doctor had advised him to take walks to relieve stress, a remedy for the sleepless nights and the constant, invisible anxiety that plagued him. Around him, the park was filled with the laughter and chatter of families. Children played tag, parents pushed their kids on swings. Alex had never paid much attention to these scenes, but today, everything seemed to touch a deep, hidden part of him. He paused when he heard a burst of laughter nearby. A small girl was sitting on a swing, giggling as her father pushed her higher. Alex hesitated briefly, a pang in his chest, but he quickly brushed it aside. As he continued walking, he heard another laugh, one so familiar that it made him freeze. The sound pierced through every layer of defense he had built over the last 4 years. He turned his head, eyes drawn towards the lake. Jasmine. She was sitting on a bench, her posture graceful yet strong, a children's book in her hand. Beside her was a little girl, around 3 years old, with bright eyes and softly curling hair. The child was focused on Jasmine, her tiny hands turning the pages. Alex felt time stop. He couldn't believe his eyes. Jasmine, the person he had thought would forever remain a memory, was right there before him, and that child. He stood still, his feet rooted to the ground. The noises of the park seemed to fade, leaving only the sight of Jasmine and the little girl. Everything else became blurry, but every movement, every gaze between Jasmine and the child was clear, like a slow-motion film. He couldn't stop himself from stepping forward, though a torrent of emotions swirled within, surprise, confusion, even a touch of fear. When he was just a few steps away, Jasmine looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Jasmine looked at him without flinching, without hiding. She was no longer the vulnerable woman he had once known. In her eyes, Alex saw a strength he had never recognized before. The little girl beside Jasmine looked up, her big eyes sparkling with curiosity. She tugged at Jasmine's sleeve and asked in an innocent voice, "Mommy, who's that?" Alex's heart seemed to stop. The child's words turned his entire world upside down. He looked at Jasmine, waiting for her answer. Jasmine gave a soft smile, brushing the girl's hair gently before turning her gaze back to Alex. Her eyes were calm, though there was a hint of pain that only he could understand. "This is an old friend, Ellie." Alex couldn't take his eyes off Jasmine and the little girl. He tried to speak, but his throat felt tight, as if every word was stuck. After a few moments of silence, he managed to find his voice, his tone hoarse, both surprised and shaken. "Jasmine, is she your daughter?" Jasmine didn't answer immediately. She stood up, her eyes meeting his directly, as if she was considering something. Then she nodded, her voice gentle but filled with meaning. "Yes, Alex. This is Ellie, my daughter." Those words, though simple, felt like a bolt of lightning straight to Alex's heart. He stood there, facing the woman he had once loved, and the child who carried a secret that had now changed everything in his life. A gentle spring breeze rustled the leaves in Central Park, but for Alex Carter, the world seemed to have stopped moving. He stood hidden behind a large tree, his eyes unable to look away from the scene before him. Jasmine, the woman he had loved and left, sat on the bench by the lake. Her hair, no longer tied neatly like before, fell naturally over her shoulders. On her face was a peace that Alex couldn't recall ever seeing. Beside her, a little girl with wavy brown hair, her small face a miniature version of Jasmine's, rested her head on her mother's shoulder. Jasmine's voice floated through the air, gentle and captivating as she read from a children's book. And then, the little duckling realized that he was different from the others, Jasmine said, her voice animated, making the little girl giggle. But being different doesn't mean being less special, right, Mommy? The girl asked, her bright eyes looking up at her mother. Jasmine smiled, leaning down to kiss the top of the child's head. That's right, Ellie. Being different is the most special gift we have. The name, Ellie, hung in the air, cutting through Alex's mind like a blade. Ellie. The name triggered memories of the past conversations between him and Jasmine. She had once said that if they ever had a daughter, she would name her Ellie because she loved the purity and strength of that name. Alex felt his throat tighten, his breath catching. His heart pounded faster as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Was this Jasmine's daughter? And if so, why did the little girl carry the name they once chose together? Before he could gather himself, a tall man appeared, holding 2 ice cream cones. He walked up to the bench, a bright smile on his face as he looked at Jasmine and the little girl. My 2 favorite girls, he said, leaning down to hand the ice cream to Jasmine and Ellie. Thank you, Uncle Robert, Ellie exclaimed, taking the ice cream with both her tiny hands. Alex clenched his fists, a surge of emotions rushing through him. He couldn't tell if he was jealous, furious, or heartbroken seeing this scene. Jasmine, little Ellie, and the man named Robert. It all seemed like a perfect family picture, one that had no place for him. His chest felt like it was being squeezed. He stood there, unable to step forward but also unwilling to walk away. The sound of Ellie's laughter, mingled with Jasmine and Robert's voices, created a warm melody. But to Alex, it only deepened the ache inside him. A part of him wanted to step forward, to face Jasmine and understand everything. But another part, full of fear and insecurity, held him back. He felt like an outsider in a life that could have been his, had he not chosen to leave Jasmine back then. Alex closed his eyes tightly, taking a deep breath to regain his composure. He told himself he couldn't interrupt their moment. But deep inside, he knew that seeing Jasmine and Ellie here wasn't just a coincidence. Alex took a step back, then another, but his eyes remained fixed on the scene before him. He knew that this encounter was a sign of something far greater, and he couldn't ignore it. Ellie beamed as she took the ice cream, her eyes sparkling, her little hands clutching the cone tightly. Robert, the man who handed her the ice cream, looked at her with warmth. Alex recognized him immediately. He was Jasmine's colleague, also a pediatrician. They had always been close, but now, watching their interaction, Alex felt their relationship had grown far beyond the usual boundaries, as if they were truly a family. Jasmine smiled and asked Robert as he sat down beside her, "How was your shift?" Robert answered, his eyes softening as they settled on Ellie, "Busy, but we saved a little fighter today. It feels amazing to come home to this smile." From a distance, Alex watched them intently, his eyes catching every gesture. The happiness they shared wasn't fake. It was filled with authenticity and love. This made him feel like an intruder, someone undeserving of being in this perfect picture. A family, a home, one he had missed out on. Ellie finished her ice cream in a few quick bites, then quickly jumped off the bench, running toward the ducks swimming in the lake. She laughed loudly, her voice echoing across the park as the ducks eagerly gobbled up the breadcrumbs she threw. Jasmine followed closely behind, keeping an eye on Ellie, her laughter blending with Ellie's in the gentle spring afternoon air. Together, they tried to feed the ducks, carefully making sure not to drop crumbs outside of their reach. "Careful there, princess," Robert called out, watching Jasmine and Ellie with a loving smile. The scene was a perfect portrait of family happiness, something Alex had cast aside in his pursuit of success and power. He remembered the reasons that had driven him to leave Jasmine. She couldn't have children, and he hadn't been able to accept that. But now, seeing her, this woman who had become a loving mother, he felt an overwhelming wave of regret crash through his mind. He leaned against a nearby tree, his eyes never leaving. His fingers instinctively touched the phone in his coat pocket. So many nights over the past 4 years, he had stayed up, thinking about that decision. How many times had he thought of calling Jasmine, to express his regret, to beg her to come back? But each time he stopped himself. And now, seeing her happiness, it felt like his heart was shattering. A notification suddenly chimed from the phone in his hand, pulling him back to reality. His assistant reminded him about an important meeting scheduled for the next morning. Alex sighed, knowing work always awaited him, but his heart was overwhelmed with emotions that were difficult to describe, impossible to explain. Quietly, he turned away, unable to watch them any longer. Alex Carter took one last look at the familiar scene. Jasmine was cradling Ellie, who was sobbing after a duck had pecked her foot, scaring her. Robert, Jasmine's brother, stood nearby, his smile bright as he captured photos of them. These moments were so sweet, as if the entire world belonged only to them. Nothing could break the love and peace of that little family. Alex turned his back, each step he took weighed down like a heavy stone, pulling him down. Each step carried with it the weight of mistakes, choices that could never be undone. The image of Jasmine and Ellie was still etched in his mind, making his heart clench painfully. One question kept echoing in his head: how could she move on and be happy, while I, despite owning an empire, feel increasingly empty? These thoughts stormed through his mind with no way out. After the encounter in the park that Sunday, Alex couldn't focus on his work, even while sitting in a boardroom filled with talented executives. He heard them discussing a new billionaire, but his mind drifted, painting images of Jasmine and Ellie, their faces glowing as they laughed together. "Mr. Carter, do you agree with our proposal?" Pamela Reynolds, the company's new vice president, spoke up, snapping him back to reality. Alex blinked, as if trying to escape the weight of his thoughts, then answered, his eyes still distant, "Sorry, could you repeat the question?" The executives exchanged surprised glances. Everyone knew Alex Carter never needed anything repeated. He was always the one to grasp everything on the first go. But this time, something had thrown him off, and he couldn't quite bring himself back to the intense meeting. Noting the palpable tension in the air, Pamela, with a perceptiveness that came from years of working closely with Alex, suggested, "I propose we take a 15-minute break." The room quickly emptied, leaving only the sounds of soft sighs as the executives filed out. Alex remained seated, his hand absently spinning his Mont Blanc pen between his fingers, his face lost in chaotic thoughts. Pamela, who had worked by his side for over a decade, was the only one who stayed. She observed his every gesture, then spoke gently, not with a question but a remark. "Something is bothering you." This wasn't the first time she had noticed the change in him, but this time, something truly worried her. Alex looked up, his eyes tired and distant. She knew he had begun reflecting on everything from the past, on decisions that could never be undone. "I saw Jasmine yesterday," Alex said, his voice hoarse, as if the words had been stuck in his throat for a long time. "She told me about herself." Pamela sat down, not rushing him, simply listening in silence, knowing Alex needed time. "She's with a child." "I see," Pamela responded calmly. "And that is affecting you." Alex stood up, hurriedly walked to the cabinet, and poured himself a glass of water. His fingers trembled slightly as he held the glass, as if a weight he couldn't explain was pressing down on him. "Ellie," he continued hesitantly, his gaze drifting from the glass. "The little girl must be about 3 years old." "If I wasn't such a fool." The words caught in Alex's throat. Pamela realized this was the first time she had seen him lose control like this. She watched him silently. In 15 years of working together, she had never seen him like this. "This morning, I hired a detective," Alex finally admitted, his voice dropping. "I need to know more about her life." Pamela looked at him, a mix of surprise and concern in her expression. "Daniel." She used his name, something rare and personal. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" He didn't answer. He just held his phone, continuing to read the information the detective had sent. Cold, concise messages. Jasmine adopted Ellie 2 years ago. The little girl was brought to the hospital, abandoned by her birth mother, a drug addict. Pamela stayed silent as Alex continued, never stopping the flow of information he had gathered. She moved to a small apartment in Brooklyn, close to a good school. Robert, her colleague, lives in the same building. They seem like a family. Pamela watched him, then spoke softly, but perhaps it was too late to ask the question she had in mind. And that bothers you? Alex slammed the phone onto the table, the sound echoing through the empty meeting room. Of course it bothers me, he shouted, his voice trembling with fury, the bitterness pouring out from deep inside. I left her because she couldn't give me a child, and now she's proving me wrong. His words echoed, not just with anger, but with regret and pain, as if his entire world was crumbling before him. Pamela watched him, worry filling her heart. She understood that the decisions Alex had made had not only changed his life but had also left a deep scar on his soul, one that might never heal. Pamela looked at Alex quietly, her gaze full of understanding. Family is more than just blood, she said, her voice calm but loaded with meaning. Silence stretched through the room, broken only by Alex's heavy breathing, as if he carried the weight of the world. Alex walked over to the window, his eyes gazing down at the bustling city below, the bright lights reflecting his silhouette like a lonely ghost amidst the brightness. I got the test results you insisted I take, he said, his voice dropping, as though seeking an escape, a sign. Do you know what they found? Pamela said nothing, only nodded slightly. She knew he wasn't just talking about numbers, about facts, but about the choices he had paid for dearly. Sterile, Alex continued, his eyes empty, devoid of any humor. All this time, it wasn't her, it was me. Those words hit like a storm, making the air in the room heavy, like a dark cloud enveloping him. Pamela stood, moved closer to him, offering no reproach, just silent concern and empathy. What do you plan to do with this information? Alex rubbed his face, the signs of exhaustion and fatigue clearly visible. He looked at his reflection in the window, as if seeing a stranger. I don't know. His voice was weak, as if all the strength had drained out of his body. But I can't ignore the fact that I destroyed my marriage, and it was my fault. Maybe it's time to make amends. Pamela looked at him, saying nothing more, allowing him the space to find his own answers. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. The price Alex had paid was already too great. What do you think about asking Jasmine? Pamela suggested carefully, her voice gentle but filled with caution. Alex bowed his head, as if her words were a sharp stab into an old wound. She's built a new life, he admitted. She has a daughter. She has the support of her colleague, a small family. She's happy. And you? Pamela asked without hesitation, her eyes filled with deep concern. Are you happy? Pamela's question hit Alex like a punch, leaving him stunned. He couldn't answer immediately, because the question forced him to confront the truth he had been avoiding all these years. In the past 4 years, he had dedicated himself entirely to his work, to the empire he had built, and it had grown strong. But his apartment remained empty, lonely. The long nights passed by, and he had only himself, no one to share with. His empire now felt empty, hollow. And Jasmine, she had found happiness somewhere else, with the people he had once abandoned. Alex stood there, once again questioning himself. Could he fix everything? Or was it all too late? I'm canceling the rest of your meetings for the day, Pamela decided, her voice gentle but filled with resolve. She didn't look back as she walked out of the room, leaving Alex with his thoughts and emotions. I suggest you take this time to think about what you really want. Alex stood there, saying nothing. Pamela's words echoed in his mind. He needed time, he needed space to confront everything he had been running from for so long. Alone in the living room, he looked at the information the investigator had sent him. One photo in particular stood out, a recent one of Jasmine leaving the hospital, holding Ellie close to her. They were both smiling, and in Jasmine's eyes, he saw a piece he had never seen before. Alex's fingers brushed the screen, pausing on the face of his ex-wife. An empty feeling spread through him as he realized that everything he had done, the choices he had made, now left only undeniable loneliness. That night, in the quiet of his apartment, Alex opened a box he had kept carefully in the corner of his closet. Inside were their wedding photos, lying still like memories he could never deny. One of them was from their honeymoon in Tuscany. Jasmine was smiling at the camera, and he was embracing her from behind, his hands resting gently on her waist. They looked so happy, like a newlywed couple that would never be torn apart. Emotions rushed over him like a powerful wave. Regret, he thought, is the pain born of ignorance and pride. A longing, a belated realization that he had thrown away the most precious thing in his life for selfish ambition. Suddenly, he couldn't stay still any longer. He picked up his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed a familiar number. "Graham, I need you to do something," Alex said, his voice decisive. "Find everything about Jasmine's adoption process. And I need a good therapist in the city. Make it urgent." The atmosphere outside the penthouse was still rushed, hectic, the city's pulse never stopping. But inside Alex's apartment, something had shifted. The man who had built his empire with numbers, contracts, and deals now realized there were values that could never be measured by money. The next day, Alex went to Dr. Lauren Barrett's office, a well-known therapist. Her office wasn't what Alex had imagined. There were no luxurious leather chairs or silent austere walls. Instead, it was a simple, cozy space with soft lighting and small details that made it feel welcoming and approachable. Not what I expected, Alex thought, but there was something about the space that made him feel he could start over. Alex Carter walked into Dr. Lauren Barrett's office, the heaviness in his chest almost unbearable. The surroundings were completely different from what he had imagined. Comfortable armchairs in gentle tones created a warm and welcoming space. The therapist, a woman in her 50s, looked at him attentively over her refined glasses. She had sharp eyes, as if she could see everything he was trying to hide. "So, Mr. Carter, what brings you here?" she asked, her voice calm but perceptive. Alex took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture even he could recognize. "I made a mistake 4 years ago, a mistake that changed my life in ways I'm only now beginning to understand." For the next 45 minutes, Alex told her his story. He spoke about Jasmine, about the collapse of their relationship, about the wrong decisions and the irreversible mistakes. He talked about his obsession with finding an heir, about the feeling of never being able to stop and reflect on the past. Dr. Barrett listened attentively, her eyes never leaving him, occasionally jotting down notes as he spoke. "So, what do you hope to achieve from these sessions?" she asked gently when Alex had finished. Alex hesitated for a moment, as if the words were difficult to say, but he knew this was the most honest answer he could give. I want to become a better person," he said, his voice lowering. "A person worthy of a second chance. A second chance with Jasmine." He paused for a moment, but it was only his own hesitation. He couldn't avoid facing his own mistakes. In the weeks that followed, Alex maintained a strict therapy schedule, even as work and company meetings piled up. He began to reevaluate himself, examining the behaviors he had fostered over the decades. He realized there were things he had lost that he could never regain and changes he needed to make to avoid repeating his mistakes. One afternoon, after an intense therapy session, Alex decided to walk instead of driving back to the office. He walked through Central Park, the same place where he had seen Jasmine and Ellie one Sunday. The bench by the lake was now empty, but the memory of that day remained vivid in his mind. The image of Jasmine holding Ellie in her arms, her eyes gentle and serene, haunted him. Suddenly his phone buzzed. An email from the private detective. He opened it, finding more information about Jasmine and Ellie. The new details made his heart pound, and an unnameable fear began to rise within him. The details of Jasmine's life were waiting in Alex's inbox, but he didn't open them. He didn't dare look at what the detective had sent. Dr. Lauren Barrett had been right. Following Jasmine's life, digging into the past, wouldn't help him make amends. He needed to find another way to confront his mistakes. At the office, Pamela noticed the small changes in Alex's behavior. He had become more patient in meetings, more attentive to the needs of his employees. Once, he surprised everyone by spending an entire afternoon attending a presentation by a manager whose daughter had a school presentation. "You're different," Pamela commented, handing him a report to sign. "I'm trying to change," Alex replied, his eyes still on the stack of documents on his desk, not looking up. A week later, during his next therapy session, Dr. Barrett suggested another exercise. "I want you to write a letter to Jasmine," she said. "You don't need to send it, just organize your thoughts." Alex left the therapy room, his heart heavy. He spent the whole night writing and rewriting the letter. Each word, each thought made him feel even more conflicted. Finally, after finishing the letter, he put the pen down and gazed out at the city lights through the window. "Jasmine, I spent 4 years building skyscrapers without realizing that I was destroying the foundation of what truly mattered. I once blamed you for not being able to give me a child, but now I understand that it was I who could never give you one. Beyond that painful truth, there is another, even deeper one. I wasn't ready to be a father because I didn't even know how to be a person. When I saw you and Ellie in the park, I realized just how wrong I had been. Family isn't about DNA or a business legacy, it's about accepting love and growing together. You found your family even without me, and a part of me is genuinely happy to see you content, even though it breaks my heart to know I am no longer part of it. I'm trying to change, not for you, though I still dream of winning you back, but because I finally understand that true failure isn't about not being able to have children, it's about not knowing how to love unconditionally. Alex." As the sun began to rise over Manhattan, Alex sat there, staring at the letter he had written, his heart filled with a mix of emotions. He didn't know if he would ever send it, but at least he had written everything he felt. He realized, finally, that he had done something right. With a mix of regret and hope, Alex Carter sat quietly in the therapy room, his eyes on the letter Dr. Barrett had just read. She kept her expression neutral, not revealing any emotion. "How did it feel to write those words?" Dr. Barrett asked, her voice calm. Alex took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on his hands, his fingers tightly intertwined. "It hurt," he admitted, his voice strained. "And I'm scared it's too late for Jasmine. Too late for me to become a better person, to fix what I broke." He paused, struggling to find the right words to express his feelings. I want to learn how to love the right way." Dr. Barrett gave a gentle smile. "It's never too late for that, Alex." She looked at him, her eyes filled with patience. "But you need to understand that real change takes time. And Jasmine may not be waiting for it." Alex looked at his hands, reflecting on her words. A sense of helplessness and longing filled him. He had broken so much, and now, he wasn't sure if he could piece anything back together. That evening, in his apartment, Alex did something he hadn't done in years. He sat in front of the TV and played the video of his wedding to Jasmine. In one segment, he saw them dancing their first dance as husband and wife. Jasmine was smiling brightly, her smile full of happiness, her eyes shining with innocence and pure love. Alex whispered something into her ear, and for a moment, it looked as though they were melting into each other. He paused the video right at the moment she was smiling, her radiant beauty still etched deeply in his heart. He stared at the screen, filled with regret. He couldn't help but realize all that he had lost. And then, in that moment, he made a decision. Alex picked up his phone and dialed Pamela's number. When she answered, his voice was steady, filled with determination. "I need you to make some changes at the company," he said. "What specifically?" Pamela asked, though her tone suggested she had some idea of the answer. "I'm reducing my work hours," Alex replied. 3 days a week in the office, max." "Why 3 days?" Pamela pressed. "I need time to fix myself," Alex answered, his voice slow but resolute. "I need to learn how to be the kind of person who puts relationships above financial results." Hanging up, Alex opened his calendar and immediately added more sessions with Dr. Barrett. He knew that in order to change, he needed to step out of his shell and start a new journey. Afterward, he did something even he hadn't expected. He signed up as a volunteer mentor in a program for underprivileged children. As a man who had once measured his self-worth by the numbers in his bank account, Alex was now learning to measure success in an entirely different way. Arriving at the Brooklyn Community Center, Alex noticed the stark contrast to the luxurious places he was used to. The walls needed repainting, and the furniture showed signs of wear. But there was something special here, a fresh energy, full of life and purpose. Welcome to the mentoring program. Monica Chen, the project coordinator, greeted him with a warm smile. She was a middle-aged woman, and her smile gave Alex a sense of warmth he hadn't experienced in his hectic years. Alex looked at Monica, feeling slightly lighter. Every step he took now was part of a long journey to find himself, a person completely different from who he used to be. I have to admit, I was surprised when I received your application. Monica smiled, looking at Alex, who stood before her, his expression serious but slightly out of place in his expensive Italian suit. Alex adjusted his glasses, feeling somewhat ill-suited to the casual atmosphere. He took a deep breath, unsure why he was here, in a place like this, when he had never before thought he needed to be part of such a program. I think it's time I give back to the community, he said, his tone carrying a subtle shift, a bit unfamiliar, but there was something genuine there. Monica nodded, then led Alex down the hallway. Children's drawings hung along the walls. These were the children that mentors like Monica and Alex would work with, one by one, to build the trust they so desperately needed, a process that would take a great deal of time. Monica stopped at a room where a group of kids were gathered, working on their homework. She pointed at a boy sitting alone in the corner. "This is Martin," she said. "He lost both of his parents 2 years ago and now lives with his grandmother. He's struggling with math and finds it very difficult to trust people." Alex looked at the boy, who was hunched over his notebook. Martin's face was tense, frustration clear in every line of his expression. But something in the sight made Alex's heart tighten. "Can I try?" Alex asked, unsure if he could do anything for the boy. Monica nodded, and Alex approached Martin's desk. The boy didn't look up, his eyes still fixed on the numbers on the paper. Alex slowly took off his jacket and loosened his tie, trying to fit into the atmosphere of the place, no longer the corporate man known for numbers and business meetings. "Hi, Martin." "Hello," he said gently. "I heard math is giving you a hard time." The boy looked up, his eyes full of suspicion. "I don't need any help," Martin shot back, his voice defensive. "You know, I hated math when I was your age," Alex said, smiling slightly. "But then I realized numbers are like puzzle pieces. If you understand how they fit together, everything starts to make sense." Martin still seemed unsure, but the sincerity in Alex's voice made him hesitate. After a moment of silence, Martin pushed his notebook towards Alex. "I can't solve these fractions in an hour," the boy said, his eyes filled with frustration. Alex smiled and sat down next to the boy. "Let me help you." He patiently explained the problems using real-life examples and simple illustrations. Bit by bit, the tension on Martin's face began to ease. With each problem they solved, a flicker of hope appeared in Martin's eyes. Eventually, the boy's initial resistance gave way to curiosity. "You're different from the other adults here," Martin remarked after they had finished the homework. "When they help me, they always seem rushed, like they just want to get it over with. But you don't." Martin's comment echoed in Alex's mind all the way home. It was a difference he had never realized before, and it made him regret some of the years he had lived. Throughout his life, he had raced against time, driven only by work, money, and power, but he had never really stopped to make a difference in someone else's life. At his next therapy session with Dr. Barrett, Alex shared his experience with Martin. After listening, Dr. Barrett gently asked, "How did it feel to help Martin?" Alex sat in silence for a moment, thinking about what had happened. "It wasn't about the money or power," he answered, his voice low and reflective. "It was about the feeling of making a difference in someone's life, the feeling of truly helping someone, even if it's just a child, to overcome their own struggles." Dr. Barrett smiled, her eyes full of encouragement. "That's a big change, Alex. And you're heading in the right direction." Alex felt a new strength rising within him. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but at least now he understood that true change started with helping others, and that was what mattered most. Dr. Barrett gave a gentle smile, her eyes filled with encouragement. "You're discovering a different kind of value." Alex nodded, feeling the deep truth in her words. In the weeks that followed, he began to build a new routine. 3 days in the office, managing his empire, and 2 days at the community center, working with Martin and other children. He was learning how to balance work and life, between the cold numbers and the people who needed care. Pamela had adjusted his schedule, organizing only crucial meetings in the afternoons, prioritizing strategic tasks. She also noticed the small changes in him. He had become more patient, focusing on what truly mattered. One weekend, Martin surprised Alex by showing him a report card with a B+ in math. The boy smiled shyly. "I got a B+ in math," Martin said, his eyes shining with pride. Alex felt something unfamiliar in his chest, an inexplicable warmth, an emotion he couldn't quite name. For the first time, he experienced true joy that wasn't tied to success or numbers at work. "That's amazing, Martin." He smiled, trying to hide his emotions. "You worked really hard to earn this grade. You deserve it," he continued, feeling the happiness in every word. "My grandma wants to meet you," Martin said hesitantly, surprising Alex. "She's making lasagna on Sunday." The invitation caught Alex off guard. A Sunday dinner in Brooklyn, a world far removed from his own, but there was an anticipation in Martin's eyes that Alex couldn't bring himself to refuse. Alex accepted the invitation and arrived at Martin's family's apartment on Sunday evening. The small apartment stood in stark contrast to his minimalist penthouse, but it was warm and full of life. Family photos covered the walls, and the aroma of home-cooked food filled the air. Martin's grandmother, an elderly woman with silver hair and a kind smile, welcomed him as if he were family. "Martin has talked a lot about you," she said warmly. "Please, let me serve you some lasagna." Grandma Lily, Martin's grandmother, invited him to sit and brought him a generous portion of lasagna, her demeanor gentle and caring. "It's nice to see my grandson smile again," she said, her eyes filled with love. During that cozy dinner, Alex found himself sharing stories from his own childhood, memories that he had buried for so long. He spoke of the difficult years growing up, of his family, and the forgotten moments from his past. The stories flowed from his lips, and he realized he hadn't shared these memories with anyone in such a long time. The warmth of family, the kindness and love of Martin's grandmother, it all served as a reminder of the important things Alex had missed in his life. He began to understand that, no matter how full of ambition and busy with work life could be, nothing could replace the value of relationships, of sharing and caring. With each story he shared that night, Alex felt his heart slowly opening, no longer hardened as it once had been. He began to realize that life wasn't just about work or business success. It was about the simple yet meaningful moments where he could truly connect with others, especially children like Martin, who needed support and love. Gradually, Alex came to understand that the real path to happiness wasn't through perfection in work or career but through the ability to open up and give love and genuine care. Alex's father, a stern and strict man, always measured success by material achievements, while his mother, who had passed away too soon to balance out that influence, had left an imprint Alex had followed for years. But recently, he had begun to realize that sometimes we must lose something precious to truly understand its value. "Sometimes, we need to lose something to understand its true worth," Grandma Lily said, with the wisdom that only time could bring. That evening, Alex stopped by the bench in Central Park where he had seen Jasmine and Ellie, the two people who had changed his life. He took out the letter he had written during his therapy session and read it again under the dim streetlight. The letter contained heartfelt confessions he had never imagined voicing. As he finished reading, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Martin. "Thank you for visiting, Mr. Carter," the message read, accompanied by a photo of the three of them at dinner. They were all smiling, and in the picture, Alex realized he was smiling, a genuine smile he hadn't seen on his face for a long time. He put the letter back in his pocket but couldn't help but hold on to Martin's message, deciding he would discuss this during his next session with Dr. Barrett. Alex began to understand that his journey of transformation wasn't just about winning back Jasmine but also about reclaiming the humanity within himself. He realized that life wasn't just about victories but also about sincere connections with those around him. As he walked back home, Alex thought about his new definition of success. The numbers in his bank account seemed insignificant now compared to the smile of a child who had just solved a math problem or the warmth of a Sunday family dinner, where everything was simply about love and sharing. Autumn had come to New Haven, and Central Park looked like a beautiful painting filled with warm colors, transforming the surroundings into an especially comforting place. A Saturday morning, Alex was walking through the park with Martin to celebrate the boy's recent academic success. First, it had been a B+ in math, and now it was an A in science. "You're outdoing yourself," Alex said, feeling a sense of pride for Martin. "Let me buy us some ice cream," he smiled, wanting to savor the moment with the boy. Martin beamed and licked his ice cream contentedly. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," the boy said cheerfully, while Alex felt a simple happiness blooming in his heart. This walk wasn't just a casual stroll in the park, it was a small step in Alex's journey to find himself, a journey that had begun from the simplest things in life, much to his own surprise. Grandma Lily looked contemplatively into the distance, the soft glow of the setting sun falling on her face, giving her an even deeper aura. "You've changed my life," Alex whispered, but it was the innocent yet perceptive eyes of young Martin that looked at her. "But I think I've changed yours too," Martin responded, his voice calm and mature beyond his years. His words took Alex by surprise, awakening a profound realization within him. Before he could react, a familiar voice spoke from behind him, making his blood run cold. "Alex?" The voice was gentle, yet it carried a strange distance. When he turned around, his heart seemed to stop. Jasmine was standing just a few feet away, her gaze soft but clearly different. Beside her, Ellie, a small girl, held her mother's hand, looking at him with innocent eyes. Time seemed to slow down. Alex noticed the changes in Jasmine. Her hair was shorter, her posture more confident, and in her eyes, there was a peace he had never seen before. "Jasmine," he managed to call her name, his voice rough, barely able to contain his emotions. "It's quite a coincidence seeing you here." Jasmine didn't respond immediately, her eyes drifted from Alex to Martin, studying the boy curiously. "Who's this?" Jasmine asked, her voice gentle but with a note of hesitation. "This is Martin," Alex replied, trying to ease the heavy atmosphere. "I'm his mentor at the Brooklyn Community Center." Alex could sense Jasmine's demeanor shift slightly at his response. "Oh," she uttered, her brows rising in surprise. "I didn't know you were volunteering there." She looked at him, a small smile forming on her lips before she quickly suppressed it. "Martin has taught me a lot about patience and perseverance," Alex added, trying to steer her attention toward the boy. Jasmine seemed to run out of words. She smiled faintly and then turned to Ellie. "Mom, can we go see the ducks?" Ellie asked, trying to change the subject. "Of course, sweetheart," Jasmine answered, taking Ellie's hand, her eyes lingering on Alex. There was hesitation in her answer. "It was nice to meet you," Alex said with a smile, though inside he felt a wave rising within him. He watched them as they started to walk away. When they were far enough, Martin, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke up. "She wasn't just an old friend, was she? She was your wife, right?" Martin asked, his voice full of curiosity. Alex sighed, guiding Martin to a nearby bench. And sitting down, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "Yes," he replied, his voice hoarse with emotions he could hardly articulate. "She was my wife." "What happened?" Martin asked, his clear, innocent eyes full of concern. "I made mistakes," Alex admitted quietly. "I put material things above what really mattered." Martin listened intently, absorbing Alex's words with a wisdom beyond his years, as if he understood the complexity of life better than his young age suggested. "So, the reason you started helping at the center is to make up for it, right?" Martin asked seriously. "How did it feel seeing her with Ellie?" Alex hesitated at Martin's question, but then he sighed, his eyes drifting to the distance, as if searching for an answer within himself. "It felt different than I expected," he replied, his voice rough. "For the first time today, I felt both jealous and regretful. But I was also proud of Jasmine. She's worked so hard to create something beautiful out of the pain I caused, and that makes me want to win her back even more." Alex's words hung heavily in the air. But in his heart, a small flame of hope began to burn again. Small but strong enough for him to believe that maybe, someday, he would have the chance to fix his mistakes. Alex Carter sat in his office, his thoughts drifting endlessly. He looked at the numbers on his computer screen, but they no longer held his attention. In a moment of silence, he asked himself, "Am I worthy of her?" Not for the sake of getting back with Jasmine, but so that she could know that the man she once loved had changed, that he had hurt her, and that now he was becoming someone different. The following week, Alex made significant changes at the company. He established a scholarship program for employees and their children, an initiative no one expected him to undertake. He also reformed parental leave policies to ensure employees had time to care for their families. More importantly, he launched a mentoring project that he knew the board would not be happy about. Regardless, he stood firm in his decision. "Companies are made of people, not numbers," he declared, his voice full of conviction, leaving Pamela, his vice president, stunned. She never imagined Alex, who had always been so focused on metrics and results, would change his perspective so profoundly. One afternoon, as he was looking at drawings sent to him by children from the community center, Alex received an unexpected call from Monica Chin. "Mr. Carter, we have a delicate situation," Monica said, her voice tense. "Martin's grandmother had a minor accident and is in the hospital. He's asking for you." Without a second thought, Alex canceled all his meetings and drove straight to the hospital. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Even though the company and everything he was doing still mattered, there was something else more important now: Martin and Jasmine. The long hallway of the New Haven Hospital's emergency ward was tense, as if everything around it had paused. Alex walked down the corridor, his eyes scanning each corner until they stopped on a small figure curled up on a chair. Martin, looking smaller and more vulnerable than ever. The boy, whom Alex had always seen as strong, now seemed like a lost child in need of comfort. "Hey, champ," Alex called softly, his voice warm, filled with protection. He sat down beside Martin, not bothering with formal pleasantries. The boy looked up, his eyes red, and immediately threw himself into Alex's arms, holding him tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. Alex hugged him back, holding him as if trying to lend Martin a bit of his own strength. Words of comfort softly filled the otherwise silent space, as if they were all he could offer in that moment. As Martin began to calm down, he looked up, and in that instant, Alex saw a familiar figure. Standing at the end of the hallway, wearing a doctor's coat, was Jasmine. Time seemed to stop, everything blurred. Jasmine watched him from afar, her gaze calm but filled with surprise and contemplation. Alex couldn't take his eyes off her. Her hair was shorter, but her eyes still carried that light he had once loved. Martin followed Alex's gaze and saw someone standing there. He turned to look at Alex, curiosity shining in his eyes. "Is that?" Martin began to ask, but Alex just stared at Jasmine, not answering immediately. Jasmine stood there quietly, her eyes locked on his. There were no words, no questions. Just a silent connection, as though everything was understood without needing to be said. At that moment, Alex felt a profound change within himself. This wasn't just about winning Jasmine back. This was about rebuilding a life, about making the important things right again. Alex Carter stood in the hallway of the New Haven Elderly Care Hospital, the dim lights of the hospital casting shadows across his face. When he saw Jasmine, his heart seemed to stop. She stood at the end of the hallway, their eyes meeting in a tense moment as if time itself had paused. Jasmine said nothing, just stood there, then hurried through the doorway and disappeared into the hospital interior. Alex couldn't take his eyes off her, feeling an indescribable emotion swelling within him. He turned back, holding Martin close, the small boy still in his arms, as if it could help ease his own worries. In that vulnerable moment, Alex realized that this mattered more than any contract he had ever signed in his entire life. That feeling, the presence of the boy leaning on him, was what truly mattered. "It's going to be okay," Alex whispered into Martin's ear, feeling each of the boy's breaths. And for the first time in his life, he truly understood the weight and value of the promise he had just spoken from his heart. For the next 3 days, the hospital became the center of Alex's world. Grandma Lily, Martin's grandmother, had fallen and fractured her hip, requiring major surgery. Alex rearranged everything at the company, dedicating his time to being with Martin, balancing phone meetings with long hours spent on uncomfortable hospital chairs. The following week, Alex made significant changes at the company. He established a scholarship program for employees and their children, an initiative no one expected him to undertake. He also reformed parental leave policies to ensure employees had time to care for their families. More importantly, he launched a mentoring project that he knew the board would not be happy about. Regardless, he stood firm in his decision. Companies are made of people, not numbers, he declared, his voice full of conviction, leaving Pamela, his vice president, stunned. She never imagined Alex, who had always been so focused on metrics and results, would change his perspective so profoundly. One afternoon, as he was looking at drawings sent to him by children from the community center, Alex received an unexpected call from Monica Chin. "Mr. Carter, we have a delicate situation," Monica said, her voice tense. "Martin's grandmother had a minor accident and is in the hospital. He's asking for you." Without a second thought, Alex canceled all his meetings and drove straight to the hospital. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Even though the company and everything he was doing still mattered, there was something else more important now: Martin and Jasmine. The long hallway of the New Haven Hospital's emergency ward was tense, as if everything around it had paused. Alex walked down the corridor, his eyes scanning each corner until they stopped on a small figure curled up on a chair. Martin, looking smaller and more vulnerable than ever. The boy, whom Alex had always seen as strong, now seemed like a lost child in need of comfort. "Hey, champ," Alex called softly, his voice warm, filled with protection. He sat down beside Martin, not bothering with formal pleasantries. The boy looked up, his eyes red, and immediately threw himself into Alex's arms, holding him tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. Alex hugged him back, holding him as if trying to lend Martin a bit of his own strength. Words of comfort softly filled the otherwise silent space, as if they were all he could offer in that moment. As Martin began to calm down, he looked up, and in that instant, Alex saw a familiar figure. Standing at the end of the hallway, wearing a doctor's coat, was Jasmine. Time seemed to stop, everything blurred. Jasmine watched him from afar, her gaze calm but filled with surprise and contemplation. Alex couldn't take his eyes off her. Her hair was shorter, but her eyes still carried that light he had once loved. Martin followed Alex's gaze and saw someone standing there. He turned to look at Alex, curiosity shining in his eyes. "Is that?" Martin began to ask, but Alex just stared at Jasmine, not answering immediately. Jasmine stood there quietly, her eyes locked on his. There were no words, no questions. Just a silent connection, as though everything was understood without needing to be said. At that moment, Alex felt a profound change within himself. This wasn't just about winning Jasmine back. This was about rebuilding a life, about making the important things right again. Alex Carter stood in the hallway of the New Haven Elderly Care Hospital, the dim lights of the hospital casting shadows across his face. When he saw Jasmine, his heart seemed to stop. She stood at the end of the hallway, their eyes meeting in a tense moment as if time itself had paused. Jasmine said nothing, just stood there, then hurried through the doorway and disappeared into the hospital interior. Alex couldn't take his eyes off her, feeling an indescribable emotion swelling within him. He turned back, holding Martin close, the small boy still in his arms, as if it could help ease his own worries. In that vulnerable moment, Alex realized that this mattered more than any contract he had ever signed in his entire life. That feeling, the presence of the boy leaning on him, was what truly mattered. "It's going to be okay," Alex whispered into Martin's ear, feeling each of the boy's breaths. And for the first time in his life, he truly understood the weight and value of the promise he had just spoken from his heart. For the next 3 days, the hospital became the center of Alex's world. Grandma Lily, Martin's grandmother, had fallen and fractured her hip, requiring major surgery. Alex rearranged everything at the company, dedicating his time to being with Martin, balancing phone meetings with long hours spent on uncomfortable hospital chairs. One day, as he was sitting in the waiting room, a nurse called his name. "Mr. Carter, Dr. Wilson would like to speak with you," she said, her voice serious. Alex felt a surge of anxiety rise within him, and he couldn't stop thinking about Jasmine. He followed the nurse into a small consultation room where Jasmine was waiting. She wore her white doctor's coat, holding a clipboard in her hands, her gaze professional but laced with tension. Lily's surgery was successful, Jasmine began, trying to maintain a professional tone. However, she's going to need special care during her recovery. At least 6 weeks. Alex listened to her words, but he couldn't take his eyes off her, couldn't ignore the change in how she looked at him, the new confidence she carried. We need to discuss Martin, Jasmine continued, her tone now softer, as if some of the tension had been lifted. Lily is his only legal guardian. Now that she's in the hospital, I can take care of him. Alex didn't let her finish. He had been thinking about this since the moment he heard about Lily. I have the space, the resources, and I already have a trusted relationship with him, Alex replied, his voice firm and decisive. I'll take care of Martin. Jasmine looked at him, her eyes searching for certainty in his words. Are you sure about this? This is a big responsibility, Alex, she asked, her concern visible in her eyes. Alex looked her directly in the eye, his mind already made up. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he answered, each word carrying an inner strength as if he was making a promise, not only to Jasmine but also to himself. Alex Carter gazed at Jasmine, the silence between them heavy, filling the room like something unsaid still lingered. Jasmine unconsciously adjusted the stethoscope around her neck, a gesture Alex remembered well from their past together. She paused for a moment, then sighed. I need to make some calls, Jasmine said, her eyes glancing down at the clipboard in her hands, as if searching for the right words to continue. As Martin's pediatrician, I need to keep track of how he's coping, especially now that my apartment is always open to him. Alex just looked at her without saying anything immediately, an indescribable feeling welling up inside him. He couldn't resist the urge to do something to help Martin, to leave a positive mark on the boy's life. I understand, Alex finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm. I'll take care of him. He paused for a moment and then added quietly, both of you. A silence lingered between them before Jasmine nodded professionally and stood up. I'll prepare everything that's necessary, she said, her voice returning to the composed tone of a doctor. That night, Alex brought Martin to his penthouse apartment. The boy carried a small backpack with only a few personal items, his eyes still red from crying. Alex's apartment was unlike anything Martin had imagined. He looked around, his curious gaze stopping at the plants in the corner and the pictures hanging on the walls. Your apartment looks different than I imagined, Martin remarked, his eyes settling on the paintings and decorations in the room. Really? Alex smiled softly, feeling a warm wave of affection rising inside him. You know, this place is now home. Alex paused in front of a framed painting that Martin had drawn himself. The boy looked at it, feeling a strong sense of connection to the place. Come on, Alex said, ruffling Martin's hair, let me show you your room. The guest room, but it's been adjusted a bit. The guest room appeared with new tables, superhero posters, and a lamp that projected sparkling stars onto the ceiling. Martin looked at it for a moment, surprise evident on his face. You did all this today? Martin asked, unable to hide his astonishment. Well, Pamela helped me, Alex chuckled, his voice full of pride. She's much better at decorating than I am. In the days that followed, Alex realized that caring for Martin wasn't just a responsibility, it was the best thing he had ever done. It was a challenge, but at the same time, it was an indescribable joy. He woke up early to prepare breakfast after watching some YouTube videos on how to make pancakes, helped Martin with his homework, and learned how to balance important work calls with spending time playing video games with the boy. It wasn't easy, but every smile from Martin, every small thank you, made all of Alex's efforts worth it. 3 days later, Jasmine visited Alex's apartment for the first time since everything changed. She didn't come alone. She brought Ellie, who seemed immediately taken with Martin. Do you want to see my dinosaur collection? Martin asked, his eyes filled with excitement. Nodded enthusiastically and quickly followed Martin to his room, where the kids got lost in their discoveries. Jasmine began inspecting the apartment, her sharp gaze assessing every corner of the space. "This apartment has really changed," Jasmine remarked, her eyes lingering on the small details she couldn't help but notice, obvious signs of a family life slowly taking shape. "Yes," Alex replied softly. "The apartment reflects who I've become." Jasmine paused in front of an old picture of them, discreetly placed among other photos on the bookshelf, a mark of the past she couldn't ignore. "Why do you keep this picture?" Jasmine asked, her voice dipping as though she wanted to understand the deeper reason behind his actions. "To remind me of what I had and what I lost," Alex answered, his eyes distant, as if he was reliving old memories. "And now what I need is the laughter of children, the joy breaking through the silence." Before he could say more, children's laughter filled the room. Ellie and Martin rushed into the living room, their faces brimming with excitement from their recent discoveries. "Mom, Martin has all the Harry Potter books. Can we read them together?" Ellie asked, her eyes sparkling. "With joy." Jasmine hesitated, glancing at Alex, but he simply gave a gentle smile. "Sweetheart, we shouldn't impose," Jasmine said, her face slightly uncertain. "It's okay," Alex interrupted gently. "In fact, we could make it a regular thing. Reading, having dinner, maybe it could change everything." A silence settled between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Jasmine looked into Ellie's hopeful eyes, then at Martin, who shared the same anticipation. Both children seemed to wish for something greater. "Okay then," Jasmine finally answered, her voice soft. "We'll see how it goes." After they left, Alex sat on the balcony, his eyes gazing out at the city. Unexpectedly, Martin joined him, sitting down beside him, his expression contemplative. "You still love her, don't you?" Martin asked quietly, as if seeking the answer to a profound question. Alex looked out, then turned to Martin, his breath growing heavy with thought. "Love is complicated, son," he began, his voice full of deep understanding. "Sometimes loving someone means giving them space to be happy, even if it's without you. But what if they still love you?" Martin pondered this for a moment, then looked into Alex's eyes, a brightness there as if he had found a piece of the truth. Alex smiled sadly. "Then I have to prove that I'm worthy of that love," Alex whispered, his eyes filled with determination. "Not with words, but with actions." That night, after tucking Martin into bed, Alex sat at his desk and pulled out his therapy journal. He remembered what Dr. Barrett had suggested and began to write sincerely. "Today, for the first time in years, my apartment felt like a home. Not because of the furniture, not because of the decorations, but because of the laughter of children, the smell of popcorn, and moments filled with love." An unexpected sense of familiarity surged through Alex as he thought of Jasmine. He knew she had noticed the change in him, but more importantly, she had seen the transformation in who he was becoming. And perhaps, only then, could this be the beginning of something new, something slowly taking root amidst the golden autumn of New Haven. New routines began to form in Alex's apartment, where a different kind of life was slowly blossoming. In the early mornings, the aroma of hot coffee and toast spread throughout the kitchen as Alex and Martin prepared for a new school day. Games, homework, and simple yet profound conversations had become an inseparable part of their lives. Everything flowed, not just as a responsibility, but as joy and connection, things Alex had never imagined he could do. One afternoon, as Alex was organizing some documents in his office, he suddenly heard soft footsteps. He looked up to see Martin standing in the doorway, holding a large envelope. "This is for me," Martin said, his eyes shining. "It's an invitation to the parent-teacher meeting from my school." Alex took the envelope, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. He looked at Martin, thinking for a moment before asking, "Would you like me to go with you?" Martin hesitated for a moment, and finally he looked at Alex, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Do you think Grandma will be upset?" Martin asked, his voice gentle but filled with worry. Alex smiled, gently patting Martin on the shoulder in a reassuring gesture. "No, she won't," Alex replied warmly. "We can go together. She's a pro at physical therapy, and I'm sure she'll be happy to join us." Martin laughed, his bright smile lighting up his face. Can I call her now? Martin asked, his eyes shining as if he couldn't wait another second. Alex looked into the boy's eyes, feeling a wave of joy swell within him. Go ahead, Alex replied, his eyes tender. Everything's going to be all right. And Martin ran off, his footsteps echoing through the apartment, carrying with them the joy and hope of a bright future ahead. Alex Carter received a text from Jasmine just as he finished a work call. We need to talk about Martin tomorrow at Bluestone Cafe. The brief message filled him with a vague tension. Bluestone Cafe, located halfway between the hospital and his office, had become the place where they met when there were important matters to discuss. When Alex arrived, Jasmine was already there, holding a cup of green tea, her favorite drink. The green leaves floating in the cup formed serene shapes, suggesting she'd been waiting for him for some time. Martin's been having nightmares, Jasmine said without any preamble, her face serious and filled with concern. He told me about them the last time we met. Alex sat down across from her and ordered a black coffee to boost his energy. Yes, I've noticed, he admitted. It usually happens after he visits Lily in the hospital. How are you handling it? Jasmine asked, her voice gentle but full of genuine concern. Alex looked out the cafe window, as though seeking the answer in the world beyond. After a moment of thought, he responded honestly. I sit with him. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we have hot chocolate together. The other night, we even built a blanket fort at 3 a.m. A small smile began to appear on Jasmine's face. You really have changed, Jasmine acknowledged, her tone a mix of surprise and warmth. I had to change, Alex admitted, his eyes briefly clouded with sadness but filled with determination. Martin, he showed me a different side of life, one I had forgotten. Jasmine gently traced her fingers around the rim of her cup, her gaze distant. Ellie asked about him and about you. She was so happy that day. Yes, Alex replied, his voice warm. The invitation to dinner, the reading nights, it all still stands. A silence settled between them, filled only by the ambient sounds of the cafe. Then, Jasmine spoke again, her voice soft, as though she were preparing to share something significant. I need to tell you something about Ellie. Alex's heart pounded, a sense of unease rising. He looked at Jasmine, quietly waiting for her to continue. When I adopted her, it wasn't just a coincidence. Jasmine looked straight into his eyes, her gaze holding a touch of sadness. She was born in the same hospital where I worked. Her biological mother had the same issue as me, unable to have more children. Jasmine's words were like a knife slicing deep into Alex's heart. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, as though the entire world had narrowed down to that single moment. Did you help her? Alex asked, his voice low, filled with both concern and compassion. Jasmine ran her hand through her hair, a familiar gesture that Alex recognized as a sign of her anxiety. I tried my best, Jasmine replied, her eyes glancing down at the teacup in her hands, as if seeking solace there. But sometimes, only time and patience can truly help someone heal. Alex Carter sat in silence, his eyes fixed on Jasmine as her story slowly sank into his mind. I supported her through her pregnancy, through her decision to give her child up for adoption, Jasmine said softly, her hands tightening around her cup. She asked me to be Ellie's mother. She said she knew I would understand the value of this life. Jasmine's eyes held no tears, but the pain and loss seemed to weigh heavily within them. Alex felt the quiet that enveloped her, a feeling filled with regret but also immense love. He resisted the urge to reach out and take her hand, simply staring into her eyes, which held so many unspoken words. You are an amazing mother, Alex said, his voice deep and sincere. Ellie is proof of that. Jasmine smiled faintly, a sad smile, her eyes shimmering but distant. It's funny, isn't it? She continued, her voice laced with a touch of self-mockery. For years, I thought not being able to have my own children was a curse. But now, I see that it opened me up to a different kind of love. A love that they chose, Alex added, his gaze meeting hers, filled with a profound understanding. They both knew it, they both felt it. Love that wasn't always about blood, but about a real connection between hearts. Like the love I have for Martin, Jasmine continued, her voice soft but utterly genuine. Everything seemed to settle into that moment. Finally, Alex gently brought up the important meeting coming up next week. He has a parent-teacher conference next week, Alex said, lightly tapping his fingers on the table. I'll be going. Jasmine nodded, a gentle smile appearing on her lips. I know, she replied, her eyes slightly sad but resilient. I'm Martin's pediatrician. I need to file a report. Could you pass it along to me? Alex nodded, replying with a warm smile. Of course, I'll handle it. So, join us for dinner? Jasmine asked, her gaze filled with a hint of hesitation, as if searching for reassurance. Martin would like it and Ellie too. Alex looked into her eyes, letting a moment of silence pass before he spoke. I've learned to be honest about my feelings. He smiled softly, adding, and I like it when they say goodbye. The atmosphere became lighter then, as if all worries had dissolved in those simple words. When Jasmine left, Alex returned to his office, his mind still adrift with lingering thoughts. Life had strange ways of teaching lessons, and he realized that anew every day. Sitting at his desk, Alex's eyes fell on a drawing that Martin had made. The boy had drawn a family under a starry sky, and in the drawing, there were more people, not just his immediate family, but all those who had stepped into his life, making it a true home. Alex Carter sat quietly on the balcony of his apartment, his eyes gazing out at the city, where the dim lights seemed to twinkle in the darkness. The emptiness that had weighed on him began to fade, replaced by an odd sense of peace, one he hadn't felt in a long time. Tonight, everything seemed to have found its place, even though life was always full of surprises. After Martin went to bed, Alex was alone in the room filled with silence. The glow from his phone's screen lit up his face as he hesitated, his finger hovering over the keyboard. Finally, he decided to press send on the message to Jasmine. The words he wrote were simple, yet carried profound emotion. Thank you for sharing Ellie's story today, for showing me that family is more than just blood. It's a choice, it's love. He took his eyes off the screen, waiting. And just minutes later, a reply arrived. Thank you for showing me that people can change. Alex smiled as he read the message, feeling a rare sense of calm spreading through him. Martin's bedroom was quiet, no more nightmares to disturb the peace. Lily was continuing to recover, and somewhere in this vast city, Jasmine and Ellie were part of a web of love and connection that he had never imagined before. His life, once ruled by the need for control, was now flowing in its own rhythm, along paths he had never planned for. But he couldn't imagine a life without these moments. He couldn't imagine not being a part of the parent-teacher meeting at Riverside School. That night, Alex pushed Lily's wheelchair through the spacious halls of Riverside High School, where student projects decorated every wall. Martin, his eyes glowing with pride, led them from room to room. This is my science project, Martin announced, stopping in front of an elaborate display of the solar system, with planets rotating around the sun, detailed down to every swirl. I got a perfect score. He beamed, his eyes sparkling with pride. Alex couldn't help but smile. Lily, sitting in her wheelchair, gripped the boy's hand tightly. You've always been brilliant, she said, her eyes filled with pride. Alex observed the project with genuine interest, not just as a father figure but as a true companion to Martin. The rings of Saturn are impressive, he remarked, offering a light smile. How did you achieve this effect? Jasmine helped me, Martin replied, glancing up with a look of gratitude. She brought some special materials from the hospital. At the mention of Jasmine's name, Alex and Lily exchanged a knowing look. Nothing more needed to be said, they both understood. She, Martin's mentor and Lily's doctor, had become an irreplaceable part of their lives. She had brought so much change, not just to Martin but to everyone around her. Sometimes, love comes quietly without fanfare, but it creates a profound impact that no one could have anticipated. The relationship between Jasmine and Alex's family had gradually turned into something strong, beyond mere help. It was connection, care, and deep sharing that they had never experienced before. Bright roses adorned the table, reflecting the soft lights of the assembly hall. Alex Carter felt a familiar warmth rise within him when he saw Jasmine enter. She arrived with Ellie, both dressed neatly, making Alex's heart swell with a sense of comfort. As Jasmine walked in, mother and daughter seemed like a perfect picture, especially with the undeniable bond between them. Martin, standing beside Alex, immediately noticed Ellie's arrival and rushed towards her, his eyes brimming with joy that he could hardly contain. "Ellie!" he exclaimed, running to hug his best friend. Ellie was just as excited, her smile lighting up the room, filling the air with cheer. "Sorry I'm late," Jasmine said as she approached, her voice gentle yet tinged with worry. "There was an emergency at the hospital, but I made it just in time for the meeting." Alex tried not to be overly aware of how captivating Jasmine looked in her navy dress, but he couldn't ignore her allure. A strange feeling of closeness and intimacy surfaced within him, something he struggled to hide, but he couldn't deny her profound presence in his life. Martin's teacher, Mrs. Harper, greeted them with a warm smile as the presentation began. Throughout the meeting, Alex couldn't help but notice Jasmine's comfort and ease sitting next to him. She didn't seem out of place or awkward. Rather, she was an essential part of the moment. Meanwhile, Ellie happily wedged herself between the two adults, adding to the warmth and familiarity of the scene. "Martin has made remarkable progress over the past few months," his teacher remarked during the meeting, her eyes filled with pride as she looked at Martin. "Especially since he started temporarily living with Mr. Logan," she added, unaware of the subtle shift in Alex's expression as he silently corrected her in his mind, though it tightened something in his chest. As Mrs. Harper continued speaking, Lily, seated nearby, gave Alex a small, knowing smile. "Sometimes, a temporary arrangement can open up long-term possibilities," the teacher continued, her tone gentle and full of optimism. After the meeting, everyone decided to head to a nearby Italian restaurant for dinner. Ellie and Martin sat next to each other, engrossed in a discussion about which planet was the most fascinating in the solar system, their joyful laughter filling the meal, making the atmosphere lively, like children discovering the vastness of the world around them. Meanwhile, the adults continued their conversation, gentle yet not lacking in depth. "The doctors say I can go home next week," Lily announced as she stirred her spaghetti. She smiled softly, but her eyes held an indescribable resilience. "Though I'll still need a little help." Alex looked at Lily, feeling the strength and persistence in every word she spoke. Life, despite its challenges, had brought them closer together through every difficulty, bonding them more deeply. And in that moment, amidst the simple yet heartfelt words, Alex clearly felt that family wasn't merely about blood ties. It was about choice, about the love given to each other in every small gesture and shared moment. Everything had been prepared carefully. Alex Carter assured Jasmine with a warm but confident voice. "I've hired a nurse for daytime support, and we've adjusted your home to enhance security." Jasmine looked at him gently, her eyes silently conveying countless words of gratitude. "You've thought of everything," she said softly, her voice carrying deep appreciation. Alex smiled, his eyes meeting hers, as if understanding without needing words. "I've learned to pay attention to what really matters," he replied, his hand lightly touching the cup in front of him, quietly watching her. After dinner, while Lily rested comfortably in her chair and the kids enthusiastically shared dessert, Jasmine pulled Alex aside to a quieter corner, away from the bustling atmosphere around them. "We need to discuss the transition," Jasmine said, her voice lowering, serious. "When Martin returns home," she continued, but Alex gently interrupted her. "I know," he said, his voice soft, "but honestly, I don't want to lose contact with him." Jasmine looked at him, her eyes contemplative, as if considering his words. "Lily came to me with a suggestion," Jasmine said, her voice dropping. "She thinks it would be better for Martin to keep in regular contact with you, maybe spend some weekends relaxing." Alex's face showed a hint of thoughtfulness, a fleeting change in his expression, a feeling that was both tender and profound. Jasmine paused, fiddling with her necklace in a nervous gesture. "Those weekends?" She started again, her gaze lifting towards him as if awaiting his agreement. "Ellie and I might join for some of those book-reading dinners you proposed." Alex's heart pounded. A strange, stirring feeling surged within him, unable to hide the small flicker of happiness. "I would really love that," Jasmine admitted before quickly adding, "For the children's sake, of course." But they both knew those words were more than simple agreement. Beneath them lay deep emotions they couldn't easily express aloud. On the way home, Martin had fallen asleep in the back seat. Alex drove in silence, his mind lost in thought. The city lights reflected on the windshield like shooting stars streaking through the night sky, leaving behind a quiet emptiness. Each star, each light seemed to carry a different possibility for the future. Once home, Alex carried the sleeping Martin to bed. In that moment, he realized a profound truth. His life had completely changed. The man who once measured success by the numbers in his bank account now measured it by smiles, warm embraces, and the precious moments shared with those he loved. A strange sense of peace filled him, as if he had found an essential part of himself that he never realized was missing. Later, on the balcony of his apartment, Alex gazed out at the city, where the bright lights sparkled under the night sky. Everything now was no longer about numbers or personal achievements, but about simple, yet meaningful moments he would cherish forever. Late that night, Alex Carter received a message from Jasmine. "Ellie can't stop talking about those book dinners," her message began, carrying an unmistakable hint of excitement. "I think we've set some expectations." Alex couldn't help but smile as he looked at his phone screen. "I promise I won't let you down," he replied, his fingers moving deftly across the keyboard. "I've organized all the Harry Potter books and even marked them for you." After a long pause, Jasmine sent another message. "She's always methodical." Alex could imagine Jasmine smiling, the glow from her phone illuminating her face. "It's nice to see that side of you used for something really special," she continued. Before heading to bed, Alex took some time to update his therapy journal. Today, sitting in that restaurant with Jasmine, Ellie, and Martin, he realized something profound that he hadn't given much thought before. "The foundation of a family isn't something you own, it's something you build," he wrote. "Every smile, every shared moment, every small gesture of care is a brick in this structure. And perhaps, we're building something stronger and more beautiful than any of us could have imagined." That dinner took place on a rainy Friday in November. Alex had transformed his living room into a cozy space, with magic-like cushions scattered across the floor, and strategically placed soft lights creating a warm atmosphere. A small table was filled with snacks, enough to bring delight to anyone who entered. "Hogwarts would be proud of you," Jasmine said, her eyes sparkling as she took in the setting. "You've done wonderfully." Alex looked at her, smiling as he saw the satisfaction in her eyes. When Pamela, Alex's vice president, finished arranging the final details before leaving, he nodded with satisfaction. But in that moment, nothing was more important than seeing Martin and Ellie exploring the magical setup around them, delighted with every prop, every book, as if everything in that room was contributing to a shared memory that would be unforgettable. And then, seeing Jasmine's smile, the peace in her eyes, Alex knew that what he was building wasn't just a family in a literal sense. It was a home, a safe space where people not only shared physical space but also offered each other love and genuine care. And he believed that, despite all the changes and challenges, they were creating something solid and wonderful, a bond that couldn't easily be quantified with words. "I never thought I'd use my organizational skills for a Harry Potter night," Pamela teased as she walked past Jasmine, whispering with a mischievous smile. "He's been practicing Hagrid's voice all week." Jasmine laughed, a pure sound that Alex couldn't help but notice, a sound that made his heart skip a beat. It was that laugh, just like before, when things were simple and life hadn't yet become so complicated. The dinner was ready, and everyone began settling into their spots, preparing for the book reading. Alex stood up, taking on the role of narrator while the kids and Jasmine took turns playing different characters from the story. Each time Alex put on his Hagrid voice, uncontrollable laughter erupted from all sides. Jasmine looked at him, smiling gently, filled with affection, unable to stop herself from commenting. "You seem different," she said, her eyes soft and affectionate. The snack break arrived, and the kids were munching on almond cookies. Jasmine continued lightly, smiling as she let go of her teacup. "What do you mean? Softer?" The Alex I knew would never voice a character or turn his living room into a children's book scene, she explained, her voice tender but with a hint of depth. The Daniel you knew is gone, Alex replied in a low voice, his words heavy with unspoken thoughts. He had to lose everything to realize what really mattered. A tense moment passed between them, filled with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Jasmine said nothing, simply looking at him, a silent understanding passing between them. Suddenly, Ellie broke the silence. "Mom, can I sleep over tonight?" she asked, her eyes filled with hopeful excitement. Martin, sitting beside her, also looked up, nodding in agreement. Then a casual comment from him. "There's room in the living room," he said, and the mood instantly lightened. Jasmine hesitated, glancing at Alex, as if waiting for his approval. "It would be wonderful if you stayed," Alex said with a gentle smile. "There's room for everyone if you'd like to stay too." The invitation hung in the air like a delicate soap bubble, full of potential. There was something unspoken, a gentle yet solid bond, like a proposal lingering in everyone's heart but not yet revealed aloud. "Please, Mom," Ellie pleaded, her eyes shining with hope, waiting for her mother's agreement. "All right," Jasmine relented, though there was still a hint of hesitation in her voice. "Only because it's pouring rain and it's already late." After the kids finally drifted into a deep sleep, Ellie on the living room floor, and Martin in his own room, Alex and Jasmine found themselves on the covered porch, watching the rain quietly fall over the city. The rain seemed to wash away all the remnants of the long day. Jasmine suddenly broke the silence. "Do you remember our first place?" she asked, her gaze distant. "That tiny apartment in Brooklyn, with the windows that never closed properly, and the neighbor who played saxophone at 3 a.m.? Alex smiled, the memory of those times flooding back vividly. "How could I forget?" he replied, his voice deep and soft. "We were happy there. Even with all the problems we faced." Jasmine asked, a sad, wistful smile touching her lips. "Yes," Alex answered, a moment of silence passing between them. "But I was too busy chasing the next deal, the next million, to realize I'd forgotten what truly mattered." Jasmine turned towards him, her gaze intent, filled with doubt. "Why now, Alex?" she asked, her voice low, like a sigh, as if something deep inside her was holding back. "Why the change now?" "Because I finally understand what I've lost," Alex replied, his voice filled with sincerity. When their eyes met, there was an unspoken understanding, an invisible connection between them. "It's not just you," he continued, his hand gently brushing hers. "I lost the chance to be a better person, to build something meaningful, and now I'm trying to rebuild. Not necessarily what we had, because we're different people now, but something new, something real." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Jasmine shivered slightly under the cool breeze. Alex felt a surge of emotion rise within him, but he held back the urge to hold her. "I'm scared," Jasmine whispered after a long silence, her eyes distant, as if they were summoning some fear buried deep within. "I'm scared to trust you again. Scared of getting hurt." "I know," Alex responded, his voice gentle yet resolute. "And I understand. I'm not asking for anything beyond what you're willing to give. That's all I want." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady sound of the rain, echoing in the stillness. Somewhere from within the apartment, the muffled laughter of the children floated out, but Alex and Jasmine didn't seem to notice. In this moment, their world was filled only with unspoken words, emotions buried deep, and a fragile hope that one day they might find what they had lost. The children were still asleep, although there was a faint unease in the air. Jasmine suggested, "Should we check on them?" She looked towards Alex, but he didn't move right away. It seemed like they silently agreed and stayed there, their eyes meeting once again. Jasmine took a small step towards Alex, then stopped, saying nothing. The space between them grew thicker than ever. Finally, she whispered, "This is complicated." "Life always is," Alex replied, his voice gentle, as if he were finally letting go of all the worries he had held onto. "But this time, I'm not trying to control it. I'm just living." A gentle smile formed on Jasmine's lips, and she looked at him for a long time, as if she found comfort in his words. She knew that tonight's Harry Potter story time had been the catalyst for this conversation. Magic wasn't just in the pages of books, it was also in the simplest, most unexpected moments. "You're kidding, right?" She chuckled softly, her laughter warm and soothing, dissolving all tension in Alex's heart. Finally, the two walked towards the living room to check on the kids. The scene before them made them pause for a moment. Filled with emotion, Ellie and Martin were sound asleep on the floor, surrounded by books and pillows, as if they had created a world of their own. The soft glow from the small lights still illuminated them, casting a warm and peaceful atmosphere around them. "I think they've found their little corner of Hogwarts," Jasmine remarked, her voice full of affection. Alex looked at the scene before him, and a deep, indescribable emotion surged within. He couldn't help but feel the transformation not just within himself, but in his entire perception of family. "You know," he began, his voice gentle but reflective, "over the past few months, I've learned something important. Family isn't something you plan for. It's something that happens naturally, growing bit by bit, like a tree finding the light." Jasmine turned to look at him, her eyes bright with understanding. There was also a hint of hope in them, as if she had been waiting for him to say these words for a long time. "So, you really have changed?" she asked, her eyes sparkling as if searching for reassurance. "Alex Carter, better I hope," he replied, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. Jasmine smiled, and within that smile, there was an unspoken promise. A promise that things could get better, even though much remained unsaid. Lily's return home marked a new phase in their relationships. Her apartment, now redesigned to assist her recovery, had become the meeting place for everyone on weekends. Alex kept his word, continuing to be present in Martin's life, and the frequent visits became more familiar, especially with Jasmine and Ellie. The initial chill had given way to the warmth of family, and they all felt that life was being rebuilt, step by step. On a peaceful Sunday afternoon, the atmosphere in the apartment was serene. Ellie and Martin were joyfully playing in Martin's room, their laughter echoing throughout the space. But when everything seemed perfect, Lily called Alex into the room for a conversation, her voice serious and resolute. "Sit down, my friend," Lily gently requested, motioning to the chair beside her armchair. "We need to have an important talk." Alex felt a wave of anxiety rising within him as he saw the seriousness on Lily's face. Had something happened? He couldn't help but worry. "What is it, Lily?" he asked, his voice tense, but she shook her head, adjusting her position. "It's nothing dire," Lily answered, but her eyes couldn't hide the concern she felt. "But it's about Martin, about you, and about Jasmine's heart." Alex felt his heart race. Lily was always so perceptive. "I see how you two interact," Lily continued, her voice gentle but piercing. "Alex, you've built this little family without even realizing it. Martin has never been happier, you know that, even before he lost his parents." "Lily," Alex began to say, but Lily raised her hand to cut him off, her gaze firm and unwavering. "Let me finish," she said softly but decisively. "I'm not getting any younger, and although I'm recovering well, I need to think about Martin's future." Alex felt as though he were being squeezed, anxiety and tension beginning to rise. "What are you suggesting, Lily?" he asked, his voice tightening. "I want you to be his legal guardian, along with me," Lily finally said, revealing the thought she'd held onto for so long. "Because one day, when I'm no longer here—" "No, don't say that." Alex protested immediately, his voice filled with pain, but Lily simply raised her hand, asking him to stay quiet. "That's life, my friend, and we need to face the reality that you love my grandson as if he were your own," Lily said, her eyes holding both sternness and deep love. "Anyone can see that." Her words hit Alex like a gentle slap to the face, making him realize that, while his feelings for Martin had always been there, hearing Lily say it made everything more real and clearer than ever before. "Yes, I love Martin," Alex whispered, words he had thought countless times but that now, spoken aloud, felt far more real. "I've known it for a while, but hearing you say it, I truly understand now." "I've spoken with my lawyer," Lily continued, her hands holding a paper tightly. "The documents are ready. I just need to know if you accept this responsibility." Alex looked into Lily's hopeful eyes, feeling the gravity of her love for Martin. He hesitated for a moment, then finally took Lily's hand firmly, his gaze filled with determination. "It would be an honor," Alex replied, his voice warm and sincere. "But I want to say, Lily, that you've been by my side for a long time. I can't thank you enough for that." A gentle smile spread across Lily's wrinkled face, the light in her eyes brightening as if a spark of hope had just been ignited. "While I'm still here," she said, her voice soft but full of meaning, "I'd be very happy to witness this family grow, with you being an irreplaceable part of it." And in that moment, everything became clearer than ever. Alex knew this was a pivotal point in his life, and he was ready to accept the responsibility, not just for Martin, but also for Jasmine and for the family they were building together. Alex glanced quickly toward the kitchen, where Jasmine was preparing mugs of fragrant hot chocolate. The soft light from the lamps filled the room, creating a cozy and warm atmosphere. Tonight, everyone would leave, but there was something lingering in the air that Alex couldn't easily dismiss. After everyone said their goodbyes, Alex stood alone in the room, his breathing seeming heavier than before. He picked up his phone and called Dr. Barrett, the therapist he had trusted all this time. "Hey doctor, I need a session," Alex said, his voice dropping, full of unease. "How do you feel about Lily's proposition?" Dr. Barrett asked the next morning, his eyes bright on the screen as he looked at Alex through the video call. "Terrified," Alex admitted, his voice low, his words carrying a palpable fear. "I wasn't responsible for what happened before. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I make the same mistakes again? The mistakes that have haunted me, putting work before family, measuring love by achievements, all those mistakes I learned from my father and repeated with Jasmine." Dr. Barrett remained silent for a moment, watching Alex as if he were searching for a sign within him. "The fact that you can recognize these patterns shows just how much you've grown, Alex," he continued, his voice steady yet understanding. "Besides, you've already been Martin's father for months now. Things are different now. This will make it official, but I don't think it will change how you feel about that boy." Alex responded without hesitation. "Nothing can change how I feel about Martin." Understanding smile appeared on Dr. Barrett's face. "Then you have your answer." Later that day, as Alex signed the papers at the attorney's office, a surprising message from Jasmine appeared on his phone screen. "Martin told me about the guardianship. I'm so proud of you." Warmth flooded Alex's heart as he read those words. He smiled softly and replied, "Can we talk, just the two of us?" They decided to meet at Central Park, where the cold evening kept most people at home. The park was almost deserted, with only the gusts of wind rustling through the branches. They walked in silence, their breaths forming small clouds in the air. There was a strange familiarity between them, a comfortable quietness that enveloped them both. "Remember the first time we met?" Alex asked as they stopped walking, his eyes filled with love as he looked at Jasmine. "How could I forget?" Jasmine smiled, her eyes glowing with sweet memories. "Right here in this park, you bumped into me while I was jogging, spilled coffee all over my expensive Italian suit, and instead of being furious, you laughed." Alex smiled, his eyes sparkling with delight at the memory. "And that was when I knew you weren't like anyone else." They stood looking at each other in silence, emotions that had never been expressed before now seemed to flood their hearts. Jasmine looked at Alex with deeply felt emotions, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. "That's when I realized there was something special about you," she said, her voice soft but profound. Alex stopped walking, turning fully to face her. He could feel not just the cold of the snow but also the change in the atmosphere between them. It was real now. "And now I know too," Alex responded, his breath mixing with the cold air as snow began to fall quietly around them. "I know because I see it in the way I treat Martin, in how I am with Ellie, and in how I love you." Jasmine gazed at him, her eyes shimmering, brimming with emotion. "I see it in everything you do, Alex," she whispered, her voice warm but hesitant. "And I see the new man you've become." Alex took a deep breath, the words he was about to say getting caught in his throat. "I still love you," he whispered, and as the words left his mouth he felt everything flood to the surface. Jasmine held her breath, feeling the sound of the snowy night surrounding them. It was a magical moment, as if time had stood still. "I'm not asking anything from you," Alex quickly added, almost swept up by the rush of emotions. "I just need you to understand that the man who hurt you doesn't exist anymore. And this man now, the father I'm about to become, he's here, still in love with you." The snow began to fall thicker, and the space around them grew quiet, like a beautiful painting, leaving only the presence of these two souls in a still city. Jasmine took a small step closer to him, narrowing the space between them, her eyes looking at him with complete sincerity. "I see you too," she whispered, her voice full of feeling. "I see the new you. And sometimes I wish I could trust it fully." Alex resisted every urge to touch her, to move closer, but he respected the space she needed. "We'll take it slow," he said gently but firmly. "One day at a time, one Harry Potter story at a time. We've got plenty of books to read and many stories left to make." They stood there in silence, snow still falling, the space between them filled with emotions too deep to be put into words. Alex knew that sometimes, the most meaningful moments weren't in the words spoken, but in the absolute silence that followed. "That's how we're going to rebuild," Alex thought quietly as Jasmine stood close to him, yet it felt like they were in their own worlds. In the months that followed, a new rhythm began to form between them. Alex never imagined he would find himself living in a reality like this, one of warm evenings, shared books, and stories written naturally, without rush. He knew this was the path that would lead them to the future they deserved, together. That morning started like every other, with a simple breakfast Alex had prepared for Martin before the boy had to rush out to school. The rest of the afternoon would be taken up by important meetings and supervising work, and their evenings would be occupied by Martin's homework and long, warm conversations that filled their small home with life. On one particular morning, Alex stood in front of his company's board of directors, carrying an energy that wasn't typical for him. Today, he felt he needed to announce a major change. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice deep and assured, each word carrying significant weight. "I've called this meeting to announce some structural changes to the company." Pen, who sat to his right, smiled encouragingly. She knew this would be a major turning point in Alex's life. "Starting next month, I'll be permanently reducing my workload so I can dedicate myself to my family," Alex continued, not hiding the confidence in his words. Every eye in the room was on him. The shareholders couldn't conceal their surprise at the news. Later that day, Alex gently stroked Ellie's hair while she lay on the couch, her fever having calmed. "Is she okay?" Jasmine asked, her eyes looking at Alex filled with concern but also containing a sense of gratitude. "She took her medicine and ate some soup," Alex replied, looking gently at Jasmine. "The fever's broken." Jasmine looked at him, her eyes moist, seemingly unable to hold back her emotions. "Thank you for caring for her as if she were your own daughter." "That's exactly how it feels," Alex said, his voice warm, a shared understanding passing between them. A moment of silence passed, and in that space, everything around them seemed to pause. Jasmine moved closer, then a little more, until Alex could smell her familiar perfume. "Alex," Jasmine whispered, her voice soft but full of hesitation. "I'm tired of being scared." Alex felt his heart pounding in his chest. He swallowed hard, trying to find the right words, but all he could manage at that moment was the truth he'd never dared admit so clearly before. "I still love you," Alex admitted, his eyes locking with hers with an honesty that was undeniable. "I love you," Jasmine said, her eyes welling with emotion. "The man you've become is the man I always knew you could be." The world around them seemed to stop for a moment, as they stared into each other's eyes, neither able to look away. Alex raised his hand to touch Jasmine's face, but before he could, a small sound interrupted them. "Mom!" Ellie called from the other room, her voice faint. Jasmine pulled away from Alex quickly, and they both returned to where Ellie was lying. That feeling, that moment, although interrupted, marked a shift between them, something that could not be taken back. After caring for Ellie and seeing to everything for the children, they stepped out onto the balcony together. Night had fallen, and the children were finally fast asleep. "I don't want to rush anything," Alex said, his voice deep. "We have a lot to rebuild." "Yes," Jasmine agreed, her gaze softening. "But I think we've already been rebuilding for some time now, haven't we?" They looked at each other, and for the first time, they both felt that whatever had happened between them, although imperfect, had been necessary for a new life they were building together, from the smallest things. "The company will assume some of my responsibilities as CEO," Alex continued, and a noisy discussion erupted around the conference table. A director on the board interrupted him immediately. "We've been briefed about this," he said seriously. "But it's not just about profits, it's about the people in the company. And it starts with you leading by example." The meeting concluded soon after, and Pamela approached Alex in his office. "Are you sure about this decision?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "You've built this entire empire." Alex smiled as he looked at the picture on his desk, a photo taken just last weekend. "I'm building something bigger," he replied, his gaze drifting across the faces of those he loved in the photo, Martin, Jasmine, and Ellie, all smiling on a trip to the zoo. That afternoon, when picking up Martin from school, Alex received an urgent call from Jasmine. Ellie was running a fever, her voice filled with concern over the phone. "Ellie's sick, and I have to stay at the hospital. Robert's out of town. Can you pick her up?" Jasmine asked, her voice unable to conceal her anxiety. Alex answered immediately, his decision without hesitation. "Don't worry, I'm on my way." A few hours later, Alex's apartment had become a makeshift refuge, no longer neatly organized but a chaotic, urgent space where Ellie needed immediate care. Thoughts of work and career seemed to fade into the background as Alex fully immersed himself in being the father, the man for his family that he had decided to become. Alex smiled as he remembered all the wonderful moments from these past months. The family dinners, peaceful afternoons in the park, long evenings spent reading, and the small, caring gestures shared with those he loved. Every moment brimmed with meaning. "Do you know what Martin asked me the other day?" Alex said, his voice gentle, full of warmth. "He asked if we could be a real family." Jasmine leaned against the balcony railing, her eyes turned toward the city lights sparkling below. "And what did you say?" she asked, her voice soft like a sigh in the quiet night. "I told him that some families are formed not by blood but by the heart. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get both." Alex responded, his eyes on Jasmine, unable to hide his warmth. Jasmine turned to him, her eyes glistening though no tears fell. "You really have changed for me," she said, each word spoken cautiously but filled with deep belief and appreciation. "I changed for myself," Alex replied, his voice gentle and filled with sincerity. Jasmine hesitated no longer. She moved toward him and nestled into his arms. The warmth and safety she felt in his embrace washed away all her worries. They stood there in the silence, their emotions soaking into each other. Finally, Jasmine pulled back slowly, whispering into Alex's ear, "Someday, at some point, we'll have a new chapter." Alex couldn't hold back his emotions. He gently kissed the top of her head, his arms wrapped around her as if he wanted to protect her, to keep this moment forever. Through the living room window, they could see Martin and Ellie peacefully asleep, their little hands intertwined even in sleep. The sight was a perfect symbol of all they had built together. A family not born out of obligation or expectation, but one forged by love, choices, and second chances. Under the starry sky of New Haven, Alex Carter finally understood that his greatest success was not the skyscrapers he built or the deals he signed. His true success was in the heart that had learned how to love, how to care, and how to give. He realized, at last, just how precious second chances in life are when you're truly ready to change. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.